We're live from the CNN News 18 Primetime studio, brought to you by Green Lamb Laminates. Viewers, a new version of Donald Trump takes charge today in just about 45 minutes to an hour. This, the 47th president version, so to speak, as opposed to the 45th president version, has a great chance to look more presidential. Trump has everything he needs to do that. A more sweeping and inclusive electoral mandate, which translates into a greater political legitimacy. Majorities in both houses of the American legislature. More experience and a more ambitious agenda with what appears to be a more ideologically cohesive team. Viewers, very few presidents in American history have either had the whole of America or most of the globe at their feet. Trump is one of them. His widely publicized mission is to make America great again, as he says. The question is, at whose cost will America attain this primacy? Or with the electoral campaign over the populist incumbent, will now trade stump staples, traduce bellicosity, vengefulness for statesmanship, transforming into a force for global good? Will that happen? Will we see Trump emerge as a force for global good? India remembers Trump in his Howdy Modi avatar, a friend of India, well-wisher of Hindus and an admirer of Modi. But that was the hoary past. In the run-up to his second term, with Trump having bracketed Tariff King India with China, vowed to expel immigrants who he claims are interlopers stealing American jobs and pledging to put America first, the future looks pregnant with uncertainties. The question then is, can India still count on Trump? There are others, of course, who believe that India and US will pick up the threads from where Trump left off after his first term. The prevailing view in India is that Trump is most concerned about losing out the race for global supremacy to China. China is enemy number one. That his claim on Greenland and the declaration to take back control of Panama Canal were not empty bluster, but a testament to his intent on checkmating China. That his entire tariff policy is aimed at creating an equitable trading system at China's cost. That proposed technological sanctions on China are to preempt its rise as a challenger. If Trump's agenda is to contain China, if it is to restrain it, he will need to keep India in good humor, possibly handing New Delhi an advantage globally, or at least in the Trump scheme of things. There is talk already of a Trump visit to India in March, in just a few weeks, and some significant political economic concessions to New Delhi. Viewers, as I told you, in a break from the past, in a complete break from the past, for the first time, global leaders have been invited for an oath-taking ceremony of an American president, borrowing perhaps a leaf out of Prime Minister Modi's book of using the oath-taking ceremony itself as an opportunity to do diplomacy. Mr. Trump has invited some important and consequential global leaders. The list is long. Giorgia Meloni, Italian Prime Minister, Javier Milei, Argentine President Viktor Orban, Hungarian Prime Minister S. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister to represent the India bloc. Viewers, and I'm saying bloc because other foreign ministers of the Quad countries will also be there. So the Quad really is getting a bit of an exposure tonight. Also, of course, viewers, we are being told that the Chinese Vice President will be there. That's a big statement to make. Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwai to represent Japan. And as I told you, the Foreign Minister also of Australia. All of these people, viewers, are there amongst many other dignitaries from the business world. Even Nita and Mukesh Ambani are there. And there is, of course, huge anticipation, as once again many say that this is going to shift shift narratives, attitudes globally, perhaps even redefine geopolitics as we know it today? Well, viewers, let's get a sense of what lies ahead, what is in store, not just for the world, but more specifically for India. And that is what our focus will be. And I want to go straight across to Dhruva Jaishankar, Executive Director of ORF America. Thank you, Mr. Jaishankar, for speaking to me this evening. India is, of course, one of a handful of countries who has been invited to send a representative, who in this case happens to be Mr. Jaishankar, your father, as a matter of fact. What is the significance of this invitation to India, and specifically Mr. Jaishankar, who's going to represent India?
No, so I think it appears, as you rightly mentioned, this is unusual in the US to invite foreign leaders to the inauguration of a US president. The US president's inauguration is usually a very grand affair. This year it has been moved indoors because of the severe cold, but it's usually a very grand affair. I've attended in the past. For example, they have thousands of people who come to attend, usually supporters of the incoming president. I'd say there are three categories of leaders who have been invited this time from abroad. One is President Trump extended an invitation to Xi Jinping, which was reported widely. Xi Jinping is not coming, but Han Zheng, who's the 7th ranking member of the Politburo Standing Committee in China, will be in attendance. He's also given the title of vice president. Secondly, there are leaders, both elected and in opposition, who are seen as politically aligned with Trump globally. And you mentioned some of those: Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy, Javier Milei, President of Argentina, but also some leaders of the opposition from France, UK, and others. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, for example, I think will be here amongst others. So you do have some people who you can characterize them as right-wing leaders from around the world, but people who have an ideological affinity or parallels with the Trump administration and the Trump worldview. So several of them are here. I would say the third category, and I'd put India in this category, are those that have a strategic importance for the US. And chief amongst them are the Quad. So all three Quad foreign ministers are here, visiting for the inauguration, attending. And then there's expectation, there's been a report that tomorrow they'll have a Quad foreign ministers meeting. This will be the first engagement of the new US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who is expected to be confirmed today.
Very interesting. But India sort of being called in amongst all the other Quad foreign ministers, you seem to suggest, is a sign that Trump will continue to back Quad. Now, Quad is always seen, really, by China, at least by Beijing, and many others in the region, as something opposed to China. Now, it's also interesting that we've seen an outreach to China. You yourself mentioned that there was an invitation to Xi Jinping. He didn't come. The vice president is there. How do you read this? What's going on here? Trump was extremely truculent when it came to China.
No, and that may continue. We'll see. I think the first few months we'll see different types of engagement with China, where both sides will try to feel, both Washington and Beijing will try to feel out each other and see where they can cooperate, where there will be competition. I would say the default setting for both sides is competitive today. There's a great deal of mistrust on almost every issue. You can go through, trade or fentanyl, which is a big issue for Trump, with drug, illicit drug smuggling, to migration, security, defense. You mentioned even some of the strategic considerations at play. So it is a very competitive relationship, and I think they're trying to find opportunities to cooperate. Trump seems to think, despite his experiences in his first term, that there may be avenues to cooperate. And one of the things he's holding out, as has been, this has been getting a lot of attention, has been the TikTok ban issue, which has been upheld by the US Supreme Court. And I think we'll see what happens in the next 24 hours or so, but there's reports now that they will get a 90-day waiver. But let's see, he's holding that out as a bargaining chip with China. So I think let's see what plays out. I think both sides will feel out each other, but there is a great deal of distrust and a very severe lack of regular contacts, including military contacts between the US and China. So this was I think he's feeling out the Chinese, and the Chinese are feeling him out. That's what's happening. At the same time, I think there is an understanding about cooperation. Trump is very skeptical of treaty allies. He believes that the European allies, like in NATO, Canada, others, are taking advantage of the US. And so for him, things like Quad are actually a bonus. He's not giving India anything. He's not, but there's an alignment of interest. So and for that reason, I think there is a continued investment in the Quad. He doesn't seem, and his administration does not seem, they want to find ways to take it forward. The Biden administration was always very careful about not portraying the Quad as some sort of counter to China. That this is a sort of peacetime competition. It is not meant to be. Let's see how Trump decides to play the Quad.
Well, just give me a second because I want to describe some of those pictures that have just started coming in. There is Trump and his wife, Melania, who have left their accommodation and they're moving towards the venue, which in this case, of course, the entire thing will take place, in fact, indoors. That's the White House, viewers. That's the outside shot. You can see Trump's cars there already lined up, so he's already inside. Vehicle is called the Beast. There he is with Biden, who's the outgoing president. And this is really where things are going to take place. Now, Dhruva Jaishankar bitterly cold, of course, in Washington, and therefore this entire inaugural has been moved indoors, if I'm not mistaken. But the chill, as you talk about, extends, of course, globally. There's also Russia to contend with, there's Iran to contend with, there are hostilities that are still sort of looming large in the Gulf, in the Middle East, Syria, etc. So there are a lot of things that need to be unraveling. But I just want to come back to this point that you were making about China, and this is specific to China. What does Trump expect from China? What is he expecting to hear from China?
I think he's hoping that China is able to deliver on some of the issues that matter to him. And these issues, on some of them, he's been very consistent about. I mean, even before he was president the first time, continuing throughout, he wants help on reducing the trade deficit with China is the single largest trade deficit for the US, as it is for India and for other economies. So reducing the trade deficit is one. Managing inflation is the other. So, these are slightly contradictory because if he applies tariffs on China, then it could contribute to inflation in the US. So how he manages that will be very interesting to see. Then I think he thinks Beijing has a role to play in helping to resolve some global issues. The war in Ukraine, he has spoken about, it may seem ridiculous, but he has spoken about this himself, working with China to get Putin to stop, to reach some accommodation in Ukraine. And then also North Korea and denuclearization of North Korea, another thing he feels strongly about and he has spoken about at length. So he does see these opportunities for China, but he's not going to expect these for free. And so I think there will be some very hard bargaining with Beijing, as there will be hard bargaining with India on some other issues and with the Europeans on other issues and Canada as well. So he's not, he's a businessman and he approaches things in this, what's in it for me. If you recall what happened in 2017, he invited Xi Jinping to Mar-a-Lago, his home in Florida, for a one-on-one. It seemed initially to have gone very well. Then within a few months, he believed that basically Xi Jinping was taking him for a ride and not giving him anything that he had wanted. And so suddenly by the late summer of that year, he took on a much more confrontational approach to China. So let's see what happens now. He's exploring possibilities.
He's exploring possibilities. Now you sort of seem to suggest that he's transactional. How is India placed in the Trump administration scheme of things right now?
I mean, I've been getting that question a lot from lots of people. We've had some Indian business delegations and others coming here in the last few weeks, and that's top of mind for them, obviously. I think, look, the default setting is he doesn't see India as a first-order problem, and this is a good thing. The two countries, the adversarial relationships that the U.S. has, you mentioned some of them, China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea would be amongst the top. Then he has trouble with the allies. He thinks the allies are getting something for free from the US, so yep. NATO, Japan, Canada. India is not in neither of those categories. So I think the default setting is a positive one. That being said, I think there's some issues he has. The two, I think, that will be the most urgent because they'll come up soon. One is on trade. India enjoys quite a large trade surplus with the US, and this is noted. So he's going to try, with China, with India, with others, try to reduce that trade deficit, and is going to want to see steps that India is taking to try to reduce that trade deficit. So that I think will be one, and he will use tariffs as a negotiating tactic there. So if some not accommodation, but if some deal is struck, and a similar deal was successfully negotiated in 2020, but the US finally did not accept it at that time. So tariffs and trade will be one issue where India will be in the hot seat for a little while. Second is immigration. Both undocumented migrants, people who have overstayed their visas, or they're quite a large number, but also the legal migration regime. And on that, there are different views even amongst Trump's advisors. We saw this play out in the last 2 months. People like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy would like to see more legal migration from India. They believe that the US needs talent in this competition, that talent is going to come from India amongst other places. Whereas others in the Maga movement, the Make America Great Again movement, believe very strongly that the US is more than an economy. It is a culture, and that culture is very much rooted in a sense of Caucasian culture, Christian culture, and that people from other religions and other ethnicities should not be welcomed as much. So I think that there will be this push and pull amongst some of Trump's advisors. Initially, Trump seems to have sided with Musk and Ramaswamy, but let's see if that continues.
So what are the non-negotiables for Trump's base, the MAGA movement as it's called? What will they sort of say, okay, fine, we'll give you some space here, but I'm sorry, on certain other issues, there's no way we're going to give you any elbow room?
I'm not sure. I think, even on some big issues, they have pushed for, they tried to push for a government shutdown on some issues. They eventually were not able to do that. I mean, this is before, again, Trump's coming to power. This is a extension of government spending. But the terms of that, they were trying to essentially hold hostage in Congress. Secondly, there was a fight over a contest over the leadership of the Senate. Trump's preferred candidate, the one backed by a lot of MAGA people, did not win. So I think this idea, I'm not sure they would necessarily be able to have their way on every issue. But you're right, on some things it will be quite clear. I think ultimately this is really about jobs and a feeling of lack of opportunity. For a lack of economic opportunity. So I think if there is inflation, if there's not a return to jobs and good paying jobs and manufacturing and a sense of security and stability, if the stock market does poorly, I think those economic factors, a combination of those, will really make a lot of the MAGA movement quite disgruntled. But I'd say the second issue apart from the economy is the border. The border, I think we are expecting to see an announcement today or tomorrow on a state of emergency on the southern border in the US. This will give the president quite sweeping powers to do a lot, to requisition a lot of funds, to build a border wall, and also use the security services in a way that they haven't in some time. So I think the border and economy are the two big issues for the MAGA crowd.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jaishankar, for speaking to me this evening. Let's